How's it going, everyone? Bryce Newberger again from the Soul Ward. Let's have some fun today. I thought we'd enjoy this concept that I was chewing on. I got some good interaction with someone on my last video. I think their name was Felicia by Nature, which is kind of fun. And one of their comments was Schrödinger's human's not a thing. And so I thought we'd have fun. I thought today we would talk about Schrödinger's human, how quantum superposition defeats divine hiddenness. So this is kind of a fun thought process. Schrödinger's human is not a thing. I made it up. Something that's interesting I find in the philosophical circles is sometimes people think that they treat philosophy like it's some sort of Lego set, and you have these preset pieces that you can play with, and that's it. You can make different things out of the blocks of philosophy, but you're not allowed to. It's not clay. You can't just sculpt your own stuff. I don't think philosophers thought that way. I don't think that is. I think that would have been a detriment to philosophy had we been stuck in that kind of mindset. Here, let me fix my camera. Which way do I need to go? Here we go. This way. All right. So that being said, I think we should be a little bit more free thinking in our philosophy. I think that's how we push philosophy forward. So people who just want to use the same old arguments over and over, and we can't push them any far further. I'd like to challenge that thought. I'd like to encourage people, right? Play with clay, right? Play with clay. So, why I think Schrödinger's human defeats divine hiddenness. Now, in the last video, it was my day off. I was chewing with the thought. I was having some fun, so I sat down and I made a video. More like a video diary, more for me. So I thought we'd bring a little bit more structure to this one. So I will actually spell out divine hiddenness in its properly understood form. So Schellenberg's define divine hiddenness. Okay, premise 1. If a perfectly loving God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers. That is, no people who would freely embrace God if they could, yet do not. Now, I think that's one thing AlexOConnor likes to point out, and why he likes it so much in the refined version is non-resistant non-believers, which means you're not resisting God. So he would say, like, I've prayed, I've gone to church, all of that, right? So the non-resistant non-believer should not exist if there's a perfectly loving God. Now, I do have problems with this. I brought up in my last video. Today, we're going to stay focused on Schrödinger's human, which we'll get to that in a second. Premise 2, though, if there exists, or not if, premise 2 is there exists non-resistant non-believers, people who are open to believing in God if God were evident, yet they fail to believe. Premise number 3, therefore a perfectly loving God does not exist. And so this is the 3-premise point of Schellenberg's divine hiddenness. If a perfectly loving God exists, then there are no non-resistant non-believers. That is, no people who would freely embrace God if they could, yet do not. So all of this I have a problem with, and we'll get to, this is a good way to spell it out, because Schellenberg's divine hiddenness, I thought, was pretty rudimentary. I thought it was pretty simplistic, and I thought the issue with it was pretty obvious. So it's surprising how so many people take it serious, and that sounds arrogant on my part, I'm sure. But let me get to why I think it falls apart so obviously. Here's why. Schellenberg's divine hiddenness with time included, right? So here's what he's really saying. Here's his real point. It's all baked in there, but it's just not so obvious when you read it as is, which is premise 1. If a perfectly loving God exists, then there are no non-resistant believers, right? So I added the "are" because that's what he's saying. There are, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I capitalized the "are," right? I added the currently. So he's saying there are none, right? So they can't exist now. So the point I made is C.S. Lewis, Surprised by Joy, is a book I'm currently going through, and it's about his early life. C.S. Lewis wasn't born a Christian. He was a resistant atheist, and then he became a non-resistant non-believer, and then God was made manifest to him. So the point of divine hiddenness that it lacks is it's saying, hey, there are none, if God is perfectly loving, then there can be no such thing as a non-resistant non-believer. So he's saying none exist right now. So premise number 2, there currently exist non-resistant non-believers, people who are open to believing in God if God were evident, yet fail to believe. So the point Schellenberg is making is that, hey, I see today non-resistant non-believers. So let's take C.S. Lewis as a microcosm. Let's pretend that C.S. Lewis was Adam in the garden, right? He's the very first man and he's the only man. He's the only man who's ever going to exist. When you start with C.S. Lewis's life, right, you would say, oh, well, there is a non-resistant non-believer. Therefore, God is not perfectly loving because he is a non-resistant non-believer and he doesn't believe in God. God hasn't revealed himself. And then by the midpoint of C.S. Lewis's life to the end of his life, he was a believer. So the first point in time, he existed as a non-believer, and the second point of his life, he was a believer. And so Schellenberg is insisting that evidence today of someone today should influence our overall opinion on an infinite being. So therefore, he's saying premise number 3 just falls flat on its face to me. Therefore, a perfectly loving God does not exist. And so we have this. He's saying that there cannot currently exist non-resistant non-believers, or else God is not loving. It leaves no room for growth. And so it seems as if Schellenberg, which I don't think he believes this, and it's another reason why I think it's such an amateur argument. Schellenberg's, I think he would say people don't have to be born with the knowledge of God, right? I think that's what I don't think he's saying that. I don't think he's saying, well, like, listen, if God's so loving, people should just be born knowing him. I don't think that's an argument. Maybe that's a different argument to be made somewhere else. But I think his argument is saying if someone is not resistant, then, and they would believe in God, then God should reveal himself to them. Reveal is a verb. Verbs imply action. Action imply space on a temporal time, like time passing. So we need to give God time to work. And so that's a big problem I have with this whole argument is it seems to remove the idea of time, which is why I brought up Schrödinger's cat's analogy. Schrödinger's cat. And here's why. Schrödinger's cat is about superposition. When something exists in 2 states at the same time, and only when you measure it does the double state, the superposition, resolve into some sort of state, right? So this non-resistant non-believer that we're discussing, this being that we've imagined, right, in this thought experiment, because he doesn't, it's a metaphorical human. This metaphorical human, this non-resistant non-believer, it's not a real person in history, right? He's part of the experiment. So we have to assume that he exists in a superposition. If we are accounting for time or not accounting for time, we have to say this being exists in a state where any outcome can happen. So we've got Schrödinger's cat. Let me explain. Schrödinger's cat. So here's the setup of Schrödinger's cat, the traditionally understood thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat. Place a cat inside of a sealed box. Inside the box, there's also a radioactive atom with a 50% chance of decaying within 1 hour, a Geiger counter that detects decay, a vial of poison that will be released if the atom decays. Okay? So we have this, 50-50 death scenario for the cat. There's a 50% chance that the cat will die, and there's a 50% chance that he will live. We don't know if the cat is alive or dead because he's sealed within the box. So is the cat dead or alive? Here's the mechanism. If the atom decays, the Geiger counter triggers, the poison is released, and the cat dies. Okay. If the atom does not decay, nothing happens and the cat lives. So the quantum premise here is quantum superposition. Until we observe the atom, it is in a superposition of decayed and not decayed states. So the macroscopic implication with all this is that because the cat's life depends on the atom, the cat is also in a superposition of alive and dead, right? Is the cat alive or dead? It's in superposition. So the observation or measurement, only when the box is opened, i.e. a measurement is made, does the superposition collapse into a definite outcome. The cat is either alive or dead, right? So we have this fixed state of 2 different. So I bring this to Schrödinger's human within Schellenberg's argument. So Schrodinger's human. Here's the setup, and then I'll refine it. This was my first thought process, and I almost deleted the slide and left the second one, the one's coming up. But I thought it was important to see my thought process. So I'm going to refine this in a second. But you place a human into a temporal existence, right? Inside this existence, there is also an all-loving God with the 100% chance of revealing himself to the human, because he's all-loving. The existence of time, which accounts for the time before divine revelation, that is the being revealed to the human, and the time after divine revelation. So time before revelation, time after revelation. So the mechanism, if the moment comes, i.e. when the moment comes, the divine is revealed and the human believes. If the moment hasn't yet come, nothing happens and the human doesn't believe. So the quantum premise of superposition here is that until we observe the human, it is in a superposition of belief and unbelief states. Has God revealed himself or has he not revealed himself? What's going to happen? We don't know. The macroscopic implication is because the human's belief depends on divine revelation, the human is also in a superposition of belief and unbelief. So the observation and measurement, only when a measurement is made does the superposition collapse into a definite outcome. The human is either a believer or an unbeliever. Now, what we would say is that that's only for that one piece of time. You put the human back in the box, he's back in that superposition. The belief upon the theologian is there's a 100% chance that an all-loving God reveals himself. And Schellenberg's example accounts for this. He says, if there's an all-loving God, then he will reveal himself. So he's also saying it is inevitable. Thanos? All right, so here's my refined version, a little bit more cleaned up, a little neater. Place a human into a temporal existence. Within this existence, an all-loving God exists. Time allows for both pre-revelation and post-revelation phases. If the moment of divine revelation occurs, the human freely believes. If the moment has not yet occurred, the human is a non-believing but open and non-resistant, right? So, but it hasn't occurred yet, but he's still open and non-resistant. So the philosophical superposition is until the divine revelation occurs, the human exists in epistemic superposition between belief and non-belief. The current non-belief does not imply ultimate non-belief, right? So the current non-belief doesn't imply ultimate non-belief. It just means it hasn't happened yet. So the measurement here, the resolution of this, is the collapse of the superposition happens when the human encounters God in a way that allows genuine belief, ensuring that premise 1, no non-resistant non-believers, is ultimately satisfied. So Schellenberg takes a slice of time and says, listen, at this moment in time, right now, there can be no non-resistant non-believers. And what the theologian should reply is, but in time, God will reveal himself. Like, it's going to happen. Just wait and see. So they are only non-believers now. Their status is temporarily indeterminate, not metaphysically settled, right? So that's my issue with the thought experiment we're doing here. Now, here's the problem we can get stuck into, and this is why I said it fails as a debate tactic. Now, Felicia by Nature, I think was their name, was like, well, it's not about debate. Yes, I get it, but it gets used in debate, right? So that's why. I get it's a philosophical thought experiment, but when it gets brought up in debate or, resisting evangelism, whatever the case may be, right? We can get stuck in the you're wrong, I'm right loop. Atheist, this is AlexOConnor. I truly want to be Christian. The Christian says, then you will find God. The atheist replies, no, I won't. The Christian says, yes, you will. We can't effectively measure any given non-resistant non-believer, unbeliever. We also cannot measure a perfectly loving God. We can't measure these, right? We can't measure every non-resistant non-believer, right? It's not possible. It's a metaphor. It's a thought experiment. Also, perfectly loving God, how do you measure perfect love? You would need to know perfect love to measure perfect love. You would need to know God to measure God. And so you surrender ground either to the theologians or you abandon the argument entirely. So here's how we avoid the you're wrong, I'm right loop. Here's how we avoid this. Right. So if we grant Schellenberg's premise 1, that a perfect God entails God's will for relationship with all non-resistant persons, then perfect love also entails ongoing pursuit over time, right? It's baked in there. Therefore, the mere existence of non-resistant non-believers at present, that's his argument, they presently exist, cannot serve as evidence against perfect love unless Schellenberg sneaks in the assumption that divine love must act immediately. And that's not what he's saying. And even so, the atheist says, oh, I'm unresistant. I want to believe now, right? Are you summoning God, right? Like, are you calling him up on the telephone? God's open to a relationship, but God is also outside of time. So he doesn't have to respond now in this moment immediately. And that's not in the original argument. He has to refine his argument if he wants to make that argument. So the assumption is neither argued for nor implied by perfect love. So the argument either begs the question or it collapses. He either has to bake in the conclusion, I'm setting this up so there is no God, right? Or the whole thing falls apart because we've allowed for time. And so that's how I resolve with Schrödinger's human, this argument of divine hiddenness. I think ultimately the argument for divine hiddenness is a foolish argument. I think it falls on its face. I think it's a nice try. I think you should try again. I think anyone who is reading with a critical mind, I think atheists should have a problem with this too. I don't think they should adopt this in their toolkit. Just like when I argue with my Catholic friend about Mariology. I'm like, I don't believe in Mary, but let me help you sharpen your argument, right? There are no non-resistant believers. Why? Why does that have to be part of it? Why is time removed? There currently exist non-resistant non-believers. Therefore, God does not exist. It's just foolish. You need to allow for time. And so I had said in my reply that I rest on the fact of really it's surrendered versus idolatrous is how theologians look at it. We would say there are either people who are their own God, idolatry, or they're people who have surrendered. That's what it means to be Christian. And I brought up, belief is not enough to get into heaven. God revealing himself to you is not enough to get into heaven. There are many Christians, Jesus says in Matthew, who will come to him and say, Lord, Lord, I did works in your name. I prophesied in your name. And Jesus will say, depart from me. I never knew you. So sometimes atheists will treat belief in God like this last minute thing, like they can just die and be like right before death, like, all right, God, fine, I acknowledge you are here. And it's like, well, that's not surrender. That's not choosing Jesus. That's not handing your life over to God. That's not claiming that he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, they'll find themselves with other Christians who have gone to church their whole life, yet never truly surrendered to God, never truly made him their king, never truly believed in Jesus on the kind of belief that I believe in this chair, so I'm resting my weight upon this chair. So we'll just wrap up there and just say that's the argument, right? Schrödinger's human, I think, it's not a thing, but now it is. I coined it. Where'd you get that from? Philosopher Bryce. I'm having fun, but I'm also being serious in a fun way. I think that is a sufficient answer to divine hiddenness. I do welcome comments. I do welcome pushback. I really was giddy to receive replies from this Felicia commenter because it allowed me to kind of chew out my thoughts a little bit better. I love them. I love being stress tested. So if you have a problem with this, let me know. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to refine my argument. And I do refine my arguments over time. So, I just hope that my atheist friends will do the same. Refine your arguments. I'm waiting for AlexOConnor to get his 2.0 update. I think once he finally updates to 2.0 AlexOConnor, I think we'll get a lot more fun content from him. So I look forward to it, and that's why I watch him with bated breath. All right. You guys have a Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho. Bye-bye.